We're now in the fourth lunch session. Recognize Senator Springer.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
I raise this afternoon to add my voice in support of this bill, the Remote Employment 2020 Bill, Bill 2020. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we think about work. It has changed the way we do business, the way we live, the way we educate ourselves, the way we commute. And from the looks of things, these changes will be with us for the foreseeable future. The truth is, Mr. President, we have experienced a number of crises, certainly over the past century, and with these crises have come a number of ramifications that we have learned to come to terms with, Mr. President. How we respond to crises determines how we as a people will progress. And my mind is taken back, Mr. President, to the First World War. And I believe it was the Greek philosopher who made the statement that necessity is the mother of invention. And from that period, which was perhaps the greatest crisis in modern history at the time, we would have seen a number of innovations, a number of inventions that persons felt it necessary to create in order to execute that great conflict. And some of those inventions are still with us today. Some of those innovations are still with us today. Drone technology, Mr. President, is a creature of the First World War. The zipper, the simple zipper that we use on our pants, on our clothes, a creature of the First World War as well. Mr. President, even stainless steel, which was used primarily to make guns, in the manufacture of weapons, is today something that we cannot live without. And these things came out of the necessity born out of the First World War. And the Second World War as well, Mr. President. You would have seen the advent of penicillin, which is the antibiotic that is still used today. We would have seen the advent of the first computer. And most importantly, or just as importantly to Barbados and tourism, was the advent of the jet engine, because a lot of persons do not see the connection between the jet engine, the creation of the jet engine, and tourism. During the 1950s, when after the war and Americans were back to work, Europeans were back to work and had some disposable income to use, they looked towards leisure travel. Leisure travel came out of the 1950s. And though most persons would have gone, especially from our source markets, would have gone to Cuba, which was right next door, and some of those closer territories, the Bahamas and so on and so forth, the jet engine allowed persons to fly in much further distances over a much shorter period of time. And that is what gave rise to tourism in this Caribbean and other places in the world, Mr. President. So out of the war came technology that we still enjoy and benefit from today, Mr. President. And in a sense, this coronavirus that we are now navigating through is no different in terms of its devastation and its impact on the world's economy, on the social and political landscape of countries, as those two previous wars, Mr. President. It's no different. But how we as a people respond to this is what will make the major difference. And when you think of the shock that the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the world, I can think of no area more acutely affected than the education sector, for example, where 1.9 billion with a B children, 1.6 billion children were impacted in terms of were out of school as a direct result of coronavirus. That represented 90% of all school-aged children in the world. And we've seen a similar impact on economies. But we have also seen, at the same time, a rise in the use of certain technologies. Overnight, Mr. President, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Classroom, all of these names that were around for a while in some cases became essentials, became household names, not only in Barbados, but all over the world. All over the world. But what that technology also made clear to us, that there were persons existing and living comfortable lives in this world who depended on technology alone for their survival. And there were persons who were what we refer to as location independent, who, as long as they were linked or had access to internet connection, could function as if they were in their office or at their workplace, Mr. President. And what this bill seeks to do in terms of inviting those persons here is to more or less flip the script of leisure tourism that I discussed earlier, that started in the 50s. Flip the script, where we now are inviting persons to come here to work and then go home, back home for a vacation. So we're flipping the script in that sense. You come in Barbados and you relax, you work for a year if you need to. Could be less. But then you go home to have your vacation at home. So it's innovative in that sense. It's almost like a paradigm shift in the way we look at tourism in the region. And I think that's a pitch that a lot of these territories that are following us will take. Where persons, you live here, now you escape the COVID, you escape the hustle and bustle of the big city. You come and you relax in Barbados on our beaches, in some of our more idyllic, more scenic surroundings. And then when you're finished, you can go home to your city life that you're accustomed to. But Mr. President, it's not only that we are inviting persons here, we're also creating, we now see opportunities to create more opportunities for entrepreneurs and persons like that to develop and build out a product that's uniquely Barbados, Mr. President. I can think of what we would call a business center, because the assumption is that persons will come and they will be on the beach, or they will be in a room, or they will be in a hotel or a house, and they will work from there. But the reality is that when these persons who are these persons who work, who are independent, location independent, when they come, they usually form communities. They work together, they meet, and they socialize together. And the reality is there's some areas where they may still need some amenities here in Barbados that, yes, they can do most of their work from their laptop. Yes, they can do most of their work from their phones. But there's some other amenities that they may need in order to be more efficient in their work. Apart from the internet connection, they may need, even in this paperless world, they may need to print. They may need a base screen. Every place they go, they may not necessarily want to take their laptop. They may not be able to work efficiently from their phone. So they may need a hub where they can go and hook up to the internet or log into the internet and work from there. If you look at some of these persons who, in places where this is commonplace, you will see that they're what we used to refer to as internet cafes. Now, you don't see internet cafes in Barbados anymore because a lot of persons are now don't have access to internet in their homes, so they don't need to go into town like before to these internet cafes that we used to see all over the place. But now there's a possibility now where we can, and I think it was Senator Nurse who alluded to it, that hotels would include packages. Maybe within those packages you may include facilities very similar to internet cafe, where a person may be able to go and not only work but also socialize, because yes, a lot of them may work within their own cocoons, within their own spaces quietly, but there's still that opportunity for them to socialize and to form little communities even within the hotel or within the city of Bridgetown. So we need to have those. So there are opportunities for persons to build out that aspect of the infrastructure in Barbados, because you may find that you may need that if persons are coming here for a year, they may not want to be tethered well, they won't be tethered in a sense, but they may not necessarily want to have to walk around with hardware in their hand. They may want to just pop in sometimes here and there and use the facilities, but as long as those facilities are there. There's a barber shop where I used to frequent, and part of that barber shop there was a small, more or less internet booth or station, and persons would often come off the ship and come to that barber shop just to use those computers. Just use those computers. Of course, those persons would have traveled with their computers, but when they're walking around the city, they don't want to have to carry along the weight, so they would just pop in. So we can create, even in our stores, a little space where persons, if they're shopping, they may still pop in, go online, check their charts and their graphs, and move from there. So there are opportunities for persons to make a living in non-traditional ways. Non-traditional ways are ways that we would have turned our back on in the past, but now because of the advent of COVID, and because of the advent of the freelance worker, independent, location-independent worker, we can now look back at some of these things that would have worked in the past in order to maintain our competitive edge in this relatively new area. Mr. President, my contribution to this particular debate will not be long. What I merely wanted to say is that as a country, I believe that we are going in the right direction. We have responded to the shock, the crisis that we have found ourselves in. We have responded to the new direction in which labor is going, where persons are more or less moving towards a more remote type of work and lifestyle. In fact, according to Forbes, in the United States, over 50% of persons are already working remotely. And it was said here, but it warrants repeating, 9 out of 10 of those persons said that they would never go back to working from an office if they had the choice. In Europe, that number moved from 7.7 to 9.8 in percent of persons in the space of 1 decade. So you're seeing an uptick in the amount of persons who are working remotely. And that study was done in 2018. So you can imagine how that number would change now in 2019 and 2020, sorry, now that there's COVID. That was 2018 before the advent of COVID, and remote working was still on the rise. So it's something that we're going to have with us for a long time. And I really hope that even though we would have discussed the whole economic models in the past where knowledge would be transferred, and that did not necessarily work out the way we would have wanted it to work out in the past, I really hope going forward that perhaps some of this knowledge that will come with these new workers will be transferred to some of our people, and we too, as Barbadians, can engage in this type of work from our homes as well, as a new area, a new sector could be built out in this country where we too can benefit from the knowledge that will be transferred as persons come into the country. And one last thing too, as I said before, they chose to come here, and there's no reason why they would not choose to use the services that are provided here. There are persons here who are pretty techno-savvy. There are graphic artists here. There are videographers here. There are a number of persons here who can provide services of that nature to these new workers if they position themselves properly. So I'm encouraging those persons in hearing my voice to position yourself so that you can more benefit from this initiative, because it's by far one of the most forward-thinking, ingenious moves I've seen in the region in a long time. And I'm not surprised, Mr. President, that so many persons are trying to either back raise us, as we say here, or undercut us, because they see the benefits that could be accrued from this particular initiative. Of course, if you were listening to our Prime Minister from as early as last year, she was talking about the use of technology. So we were not caught flat-footed like some persons. Our Prime Minister understood, our leader understood the importance of technology in the 21st century Barbados. They understood it. And now we are seeing the manifestation of that brilliance and that leadership. That is one thing that COVID has taught us, is that leadership matters. So as I close, Mr. President, I just want to, like senators before me, congratulate the Prime Minister on her leadership in this regard. I have no doubt in my mind that this program, this initiative, will reap great benefits for this country, and that this will bring us out of the slump that we now find ourselves in as a direct result of this COVID-19 pandemic. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you, Dr. Springer. We next call upon Senator Lisa Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this important bill before us. Mr. President, I want to frame my comments in the context of two main thematic areas. What is tourism versus what is migration? And the reason why I chose to frame my comments in this context, Mr. President, is because there has been a lot of misinformation circulating in the public space and even in this place at times, Mr. President, about what this particular initiative is. Yes, we are treating to issues relating to COVID-19. Yes, we are treating to ensuring the economy is jump-started. Yes, we are treating to the fact that the tourism sector has taken a pummeling and we no longer have air passengers or cruise passengers at this time coming into the country. We no longer have bums in seats or beds and heads. We don't have any of that happening at this, or heads and beds. But we have to be able to stimulate growth, Mr. President, because there are those even within this chamber who, if we don't do this, and if we don't treat to this demographic, we'll say, but where's the growth strategy? What is the government doing to stimulate growth? This is one of the things that the government is doing, Mr. President, to stimulate growth. And what does this mean? For the purposes of this bill, Mr. President, we are not treating to persons who are coming either as a permanent resident, they're not coming as a person who is applying for and being granted a work permit, they're not coming here as a migrant seeking to establish citizenship, Mr. President. They're coming here as a tourist. And I'm not aware, Mr. President, and certainly I have some limited experience being a tourist myself from time to time, arriving in any country and having anyone ask me who is a part of my party. I am not aware, Mr. President, of anyone asking me whether I am black, white, Christian, non-Christian, whether I have a partner, a husband, not as a tourist, Mr. President. And that is an important distinction that must be made here. We do not practice bigotry or discrimination when it comes to anyone, but more specifically in the context of this bill, that has no place in our characterization of the persons who are eligible to come to Barbados as tourists for the period of 12 months to live and work in Barbados while maintaining their natural citizenship, their right to work, and everything else, payment of taxes in another jurisdiction. And I want to make that distinction up front so that there is no attempt to create mischief and misinformation in a public space about a bill that seeks to create a new category of tourist. Now, why is this important, Mr. President? This is important because for many years, many people who have served as pundits, political actors, economic actors, persons in the public space who have spoken about the need for Barbados and other countries like ours to diversify away from tourism, Mr. President. They have talked about, oh, what are we doing? Tourism is our main foreign exchange earner. It is our main employer. What are we doing to move away from tourism? Now, I found in the process of preparing for this study, Mr. President, for this presentation, a study that was done in 2015. It's called Tourism and the Barbados Economy. It was done by Dr. Brian Francis, Micheline St. Juste, and Dr. Justin Robinson of the University of the West Indies. And it raises some interesting points, Mr. President, that I want to raise here today, but there's one particular paragraph that I want to read. It says, in the Growth and Development Strategy for Barbados in 2013, it acknowledged that the performance of the tourism industry was volatile and suffered an annual average loss of 1% due to challenges in the external economy. Due to an estimated sharp increase in the quality of the villa rooms, the industry realized some success in the area of villa tourism, which now accounts for over 40%. But this is a key thing here that I want to raise. The designation of aspects of Barbados' tourism product as World Heritage Site heralded the diversification efforts that were being undertaken, among others, in the tourism industry. And this provided a perfect avenue for full diversification of Barbados' tourism market. This was a 2015 study, Mr. President. And I say this to say that there has been, for a long time, a discussion in our country around the need for diversification in the tourism market. And we have seen in our partners, whether it's BTMI, BTPA, BHTA, the Ministry of Tourism, whoever it is, Barbados Port, the Grand Island International Airport, we have all benefited from those diversification efforts, Mr. President, at a policy level. What we are discussing here today, Mr. President, is yet another attempt at Barbados, not just responding to the immediate dynamics of the COVID pandemic, which is before us, but if you put it in its broadest policy frame, it is also a continuation of Barbados's efforts under this administration to diversify the tourism product. And that is something, Mr. President, that is to be lauded, and it is something to which I give my full support. I want to raise, Mr. President, also another element of diversification of our tourism product, and it was spoken about also in this study. It talked about the diasporic tourism market, and it spoke to the opportunity that Barbados and countries like small island developing states have to be able to tap into tourism in your diaspora. Now, one of our senators, who happens to be the leader of government business and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and others who have been participating in an initiative which was mentioned, I believe, by Senator Greenidge, the Regathering Initiative, are engaging in what Dr. Keith Nurse in a 2015 study called Diasporic Diplomacy. Now, Dr. Keith Nurse, in his study in 2015, he talked about some of the challenges that many small island developing countries were dealing with as it relates to migration. And he said some interesting things. It was actually a 2017 study. It said that more than 40% of the population of Caribbean respondents, particularly those between the ages of 15 to 24, demonstrated a willingness to migrate. They were willing to leave their countries and willing to live abroad and work abroad. 28% of those between 25 and 64 were also willing. But it also made an interesting point. It said that in 2017, Caribbean small states had almost doubled, seeing an increase of over 187,800 persons in 1960 to over 346,000 in 2015, migrating outside of the country, and most of these were highly skilled workers. Now, Mr. President, if we think back to COVID-19 and we think back to the policy that Barbados undertook as it relates to Barbadians returning home, we welcomed Barbadians from wherever they were to come home. Under whatever circumstances, and we spoke about it in this place, Mr. President, we said to Barbadians, this is your home. Our Immigration Act says Barbadian citizens are entitled to come home, and we welcomed them home. But up comes COVID-19, Mr. President. These are 2015 and 2017 studies that I have just quoted. Here we come now in 2020, and we have a COVID-19 which decimates the global economy, which now contemplates people staying at home, remaining in your home space and working externally from there. Many of us have worked from home for a few weeks, starting in February. Many of us went into lockdown and worked from home for several weeks in March, and many people are still balancing between working from home and going out to the office because a new normal has emerged here in Barbados. Why was that? Because you now had mandatory government quarantines which require people to stay at home. Mr. President, does this not create an ideal opportunity for us to, one, diversify our tourism products so that we have this remote work created here in Barbados where people from all over the world can come here, but also, does it not create an opportunity for our Barbadian diaspora, who have been the beneficiaries of our diasporic diplomacy in such large numbers, more of our Barbadians living abroad than living at home? Does this not create an opportunity for them, quarantining in place, working from home in place, to have the chance to come back to their homeland safely and live and work in Barbados for the period of 12 months, while retaining their status abroad? I think this is what we're talking about when we talk about diversification of opportunities and diversification of our economy, Mr. President. I think that is a critical point that we're dealing with. But beyond that, beyond the tourism sector, Mr. President, this is also about Barbados embracing what some may call the future of work. And when I say some may call the future of work, I say that deliberately, Mr. President, because when I started to prepare for this debate, Mr. President, I started to look to see where the earliest bodies of work existed that spoke about the future of work, that spoke about remote work. And as far back as 2005, Mr. President, there were studies being prepared that talked about remote working. You had people talking about digital nomads, and Senator McConnell spoke about that. You talked about employment that was location independent. It didn't have to matter where you were in the world, but you were location independent. Since 2005, Mr. President, so In 2005, 15, 2017, 2018, before we began to see any sign of COVID-19 starting in December, January of 2020, these workspaces existed. And I found another study, it's called Global Workplace Analytics. It was 2019. It was saying that prior to 2019, 44% of companies did not allow remote work. 44% prior to 2019 in global analytics, global workplace analytics, did not allow workplace remote work. But in the United States in particular, 4.3 million people in the USA work from home at least half of the time. This is in 2019. Since 2005, when this study was first done, there has been a 140% increase in the number of persons working from home globally. Telecommuting has increased by 115% in the last decade alone. Small companies, and Senator Holder has spoken extensively about the makeup of the market here in Barbados. Almost 90%, if not more, of all of our businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises. Small companies are more than likely, according to this same study, to hire remote workers. They expected, this is at 2019, that by 2028, just 8 years from now, 73% of all departments in all companies will have remote workers. Now, if this is the data being generated from ILO, Global Analytics Workplace, State of Telecommunications, State of Telecommuting, all of these are studies which are coming out of these entities, and they are speaking about not just the present of remote work, but the past of remote work and the expected projections in the future. But then came COVID-19, and it expedited many of these initiatives, and companies that previously, including government, which did not allow you to work from home, have had to embrace it. Is this not an opportunity, Mr. President? And I ask those who may have a sinister motive for opposing this particular initiative, is this not an opportunity for us to catch up with the rest of the world? We may think, yes, that we are making headway when compared to many in the region. We are. We may think that this is a response to COVID, and yes, it is. But the fact of the matter is, and many don't like it when we say this, a lost decade left us behind the rest of the world in many instances where we should have embraced remote working a long time ago. And the opportunity for us now to embrace remote working and to use it under the umbrella of a tourism platform is an ideal opportunity that COVID has presented to us. And I think that the administration, led by the Prime Minister Mia Amor-Motley, should be commended for taking this opportunity and holding on to it with both hands, because in many instances, Mr. President, we have needed to do initiatives like this for some time. And it is the creativity, it is the willingness to go out front and to make these things happen that has to be commended by this administration, Mr. President. COVID has challenged us in ways that we could not have imagined. And I'll give an example that I am experiencing myself. Before COVID, there were some aspects of what we did, for example, in the Bridgetown port that many people thought could not be digitized. There were many instances where people felt that they had to physically be in front of cargo for the purpose of inspection, what they thought could not have been done. Now COVID comes around and everyone is concerned about their own space, and so we are now remotely interacting with certain aspects of cargo clearances. In some instances as well, even for crew. I heard mentioned in the other place, and I heard it mentioned today by Senator Wiggins about the repatriation of crew members. We, as at today, have repatriated about 22,000 crew members from cruise ships alone, not to mention from cargo ships. And in many of those instances, Mr. President, we did a lot of those transactions remotely. Immigration, for example, in some instances, once upon a time, you had a person who disembarked a vessel, walked through the immigration department, presented themselves physically before the immigration officer, had their documents physically inspected. During COVID, Mr. President, much of that changed out of necessity. And so the conversation for us as a country now is, what does this mean for us having a 24-hour economy? What does this mean for the efforts being led by Senator McConney on digitization and transformation using technology? What are some of the ways in which we work that can now be done remotely, that can allow us to retrain, retool, repurpose, and reposition much of our workforce so that Barbados becomes the Barbados that is fit for purpose in the third decade of the 21st century. What is required of us now? As we prepare, and Senator Nurse mentioned it, as we prepare to welcome visitors to our country, they are not CARICOM skilled workers under the Barbados Accreditation Council requiring a skills certificate. They are not workers requiring a work permit. They are not residents requiring residency. They are tourists. What is required for us to support tourists for a 12-month basis in the same way that we already welcome the snowbirds who come here for 6 months out of every year and spend their time, their resources, and are on our West Coast in particular as differentiated from our South Coast. What is required for Barbados to utilize this new opportunity to drive growth, to transform the future of work, to transform the nature of work, to support labor mobility globally, and also to diversify our tourism product, Mr. President. And I think these are the policy conversations that our government has been having. This is the start, I believe, of these conversations. This is a brilliant new initiative, which I expect to go even further than we have currently contemplated over time, as we're able to see the traction that has already been generated and the mirroring that has taken place in other economies, because it is a fantastic initiative that is meant to transform the way in which we see the world and the way in which the world sees us as a tourism destination. And with these few words, Mr. President, I give my full support to this bill. I thank you.
Thank you. Senator Dr. Rogers.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I rise to lend my voice to the remote employment bill that we're debating here and to commend the government for this initiative. I haven't had the opportunity before to, and deliberately so, to commend the government for the way it has handled the pandemic, as I was giving the senators on the other side the opportunity to do so before I say anything on that matter. But I believe that we ought to be proud as a nation and the government that we have and the personnel that have worked during the time of this pandemic, for our Czar and the Minister of Health, and having done the tremendous job they've done in getting Barbados to the point that it's at. I know when we started on this journey some months ago, we were uncertain about what the outcome would be, and we were dealing with something of which we knew very little, very much like Voltaire's assessment of doctors. Doctors take medicines of which they know little, put into our bodies of which they know less, to cure diseases of which they know nothing. But we started out, sorry, sir. We started out on that journey, and I believe that going with the ebb and flow of everything this virus presented, they have really done a tremendous job. And when we look worldwide at what was possible, how much could have gone wrong, we really ought to be thankful for where we are today. We're not putting our hands up in jubilation, but we're just thankful for where we are today. I wish to say, I don't know if I'm supposed to speak for them or not, but I believe I should. On behalf of religious organizations, thanks to the government for the caution in which they moved to close and reopen religious institutions, because we had seen throughout the world that churches were some of the hot spots for coronavirus, and I think that they were very, very cautious and very caring towards religious organizations, though some may not have thought so, in ensuring that our reputations were protected in the midst of this pandemic. So I wish to thank them for that as well. But equally so, I wish to thank the Barbadian people in general for the discipline exercised during the period. I No, you would have had a little party here or there that we heard about. And I can recall over in my side, one day I had to go and talk to the youngsters, poor little ones, little preteens and teenagers just couldn't get away from playing their football. And I had to warn them that they were endangering their elders at home and so on, and they were compliant. So as a nation, we have been very disciplined, and we've gotten to this point. Coronavirus has changed the world, as you've heard just about every senator mentioned this afternoon. And there are some things that will not come back. There are some things that were normal for us that will not be a part of our lives anymore. There are some new things that may become very much a part of our operations. In fact, I think that many persons have now realized that it is possible to work efficiently from home. And I do not have any empirical data other than what persons have said, that some persons have actually saved during the corona period because you haven't had to commute. You didn't stop at your favorite restaurant that you may have stopped at, your favorite fast food outlet. You cooked at home, and so you realized that you actually saved during the period. And I believe that that is something that would push some persons to want to continue working in that way as well. We cannot assess the government based on results just yet in terms of the initiatives they've had during this COVID-19 period. But what we can do is probably give them an A+ for innovation in terms of the policies that they have sought to put in place to chart us through this period. And this remote employment bill is one such policy. I believe that it is a direction that we can look in. It is an area that we can embrace. But let us also do so recognizing that it will not be the end-all and be-all of our problems, that there are many challenges confronting us, and we have to keep at the forefront that notion of lives versus livelihoods. And there are times when we'll have to make decisions based on procuring livelihoods, but there are other times when we'll have to make decisions on safeguarding lives. I've said that to say that along with the 3 F's that Senator McConney mentioned, the focusing and fast and being flexible, there's also a C, caution. That we have to be very cautious in this period as we look in other directions on how we can stimulate tourism and economic activity in our country. There's one thing that we need to be very cognizant of. Yes, we have managed to flatten the curve here in Barbados, but worldwide, COVID-19 is in its embryonic stages. It is escalating every day. And you've heard from Senator Greenwich and I believe Senator Nurse and some others that we have to be cautious about who we allow in. This is a time when we cannot take any chances whatsoever with the populace of Barbados. Neither can we allow ourselves to be harmed by the ineptitude of others. You know, we have done what was necessary here to safeguard our people, and we have to make sure that our people are at the forefront of everything we do. As I mentioned at the start of the debate on this pandemic, Barbados is one of the vulnerable areas in this world because we have an aged population, and as we would have highlighted some time before, we have a high rate of chronic communicable diseases. And we have to be extremely cautious about how we go about bringing people in and how they move around in our space as well. And that is something I wish to speak on at another time, but I believe that we have to be very cautious and take the hard decisions, because one of the things that we have to pay close attention to here is that we have seen what happened from 2001, 2008, 2020. We cannot remain so vulnerable to the world. We have to start building up resilience within. And if that means that one generation has to sacrifice for the sake of others, it just so happens that we may have to be that generation. Over the time, you would have heard me said, we have to make more than 3-year plans. We have to look somewhere 20, 25 years down the road and decide that, I'm going to use a Bajan term here, if we have to suck salt now, at least our children will be better off later on. And so I believe that this is still an opportunity to press the reset button. It is still an opportunity for us to look within and build a type of resilience. Yes, we'll always need the world. We'll always be dependent upon aspects of the world, but I believe that there's much more that can be done within to strengthen our resolve and strengthen our structures from within to help us to cushion some of the effects of these global shocks that we have been experiencing from time to time. I think this one has shown us how vulnerable we are. This one has shown us how easily things can fall apart. And so, while I support this bill, I want to remind us that this is not a cure-all, it is an avenue. We then have to look at other areas in which we can make our country more resilient and make our country stronger. But again, it comes back to lives versus livelihoods, and sometimes we have to safeguard lives. And so with those few words, sir, I wish to support this bill.
We next hear from Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. President. And maybe I should start by reflecting on some words that Senator Cummins made. Not getting in too deep into the speech yet, because I do have to allow some time for Senator Franklin to make it to the members' room to sit and listen to, yes, yeah, we know that. The Northernmost comments certainly reinforce that. So I'll give Senator Franklin the time that he needs to get to the members' room. But Mr. President, Senator Cummins did indicate and reference a question in her presentation. And that question was, what are we doing to move away from tourism? And she would have made reference to a study that was done. And I start with that because, Mr. President, I've said in this chamber before, and I want to reinforce it again, that while there has been a lot of talk continuously about the need to diversify and the need to look at other aspects of the economy and look at other industries, the reality is that when you look at it in a realistic way, the truth is there are not a lot of other areas that we can really look at to give us the kind of benefit that we want as it relates to tourism. And I'm going to spend a little time today, Mr. President, just reflecting on tourism, the importance of tourism, and where we are and why this piece of legislation is extremely important. Sir, you know, the last few months has clearly demonstrated how very important tourism is to the Barbados economy. numerous farmers, numerous beauticians. In fact, sir, you know, when you are getting a familiarity with tourism, we sometimes, sir, display what we call a tourism tree. And it's what we do, sir, is that we have this big pictorial representation of a tourism tree. And the roots of the tree, the roots represent the different visitors that come from the different source markets. And then you have the trunk of the tree, where you have the different monies with respect to the different areas of expenditure that you have, whether it be the hotels, whether it be the tourism, the planning, the human resource development. That represents the trunk. And then you go to the branches, and the branches have construction. The branches have boutiques. The branches have buses, taxi operations. I mean, it is the wide number of areas that are touched, sir: coaches, entertainment, local agriculture, food and beverage, shopping. The magnitude of the different areas that tourism tree touches really is significant, and it really signals the very, very deep and integral part that tourism plays within the Barbados economy. And when you look at the pictorial representation of the tree as well, you also see the area with respect to the earning of foreign exchange. You see the area with respect to investment, and of course, you see the area with respect to employment. And I reference on those things because, Mr. President, I think that there is not always the clear understanding of the importance of tourism to the Barbados economy and the importance of tourism to the day-to-day well-being and the lives of Barbadians. Of course, sir, with respect to that tree, it needs to be watered. And in that pictorial representation, you will see what looks like a watering can. And with respect to the watering can, you will see reference being made to research and development and marketing and promotion. And I think, sir, that one of the things that we need to ensure that we are able to do is to educate persons more about the importance of tourism and the importance of tourism to the economy and how the economy works generally. I start at that point because I think, sir, that it is very critical and important to understand. The truth is that with literally the overnight halt in the tourism industry, there have been severe economic implications for Barbadians. You know, I looked, while sitting here today, I was looking at an entity with which I'm associated and as a director, and looking at the projections in terms of the revenue in comparison to 2019. There has been a 50% reduction. And let me say that that is only today, because what is likely to happen is that if we don't get things up and running and get things working, then the implications with respect to that kind of impact is likely to be a lot greater. So there are implications, sir, with respect to the economy, implications with respect to businesses, implications with respect to households, implications with respect to individuals. And we have to find a way to get the economy working again. And I do understand the concerns that persons have in terms of the opening of the country and to whoever is coming into the country. But I think government has done a good job in being able to balance between the issues that relate to health and those issues that relate to the economy. And I believe that the government should be complimented in that regard. Mr. President, you know, that this is not an easy exercise. It really could not be an easy exercise. The government has developed a number of protocols that deal with the issues relating to how persons move around. They deal with the issue of the re-entry into the country. Government has identified certain countries as being high risk, medium risk, low risk. There are different policy positions that have been taken with respect to those areas. And I think by and large that those protocols have been very good protocols developed. There have been protocols with respect to the operation of bars, with respect to accommodation, respect to water sports operations, with respect to restaurants, all of the areas in which there is activity and interaction of people. And the one thing that we can say is that the government of Barbados has been very responsible in the manner in which it has sought to deal with the issue and the impact of COVID-19. The government of Barbados has followed the science and at the same time has sought to ensure that the most vulnerable in our society, that they are protected. But Sari started by referencing tourism and referencing the tourism tree. And I want to go back to a point that I made some time earlier, and that relates to airlift. The reality is, sir, that you cannot have a viable tourism industry if you don't have international transport, if you don't have planes coming into the destination, and if you don't have the cruise ships coming. Now, my understanding is, and Senator Cummins can speak in greater detail with respect to the cruise ships, but my understanding is that the cruise business is not likely to come back before December or January, that you will not see arrival of cruise ships coming before that. Normally during the summer period, cruise ships do reposition to the Mediterranean. At this time, that is not being done, and there is a desire for the cruise ship business to come back in December and in January. The expectation is that we will see some benefits coming from that. And I think the government has taken a very responsible position in the manner in which the government has been communicating with the cruise lines. Senator Cummins would have spoken to the different repatriation numbers with respect to the crew that was here and the crew that is being accommodated here. A very responsible manner. The government of Barbados has taken the position that Barbadians would not be denied entry in their own country. And I think, sir, that is a very responsible position to take. But, sir, as I speak about tourism and as I speak about the airlift, I said in this chamber before that the airlift was significantly reduced. And I said at that time that my estimation was that we had in the vicinity of 1 million seats coming into Barbados every year. But I thought after saying that it was important for me to go and do some research. So I went and I did some research, sir. And in 2019, there were 2.7 million seats coming into Barbados. 2.7 million seats coming into Barbados. And we can take out of that about 140,000 seats in relation to air-sea transfers. Right? So there would have been about 2.6 million seats coming into Barbados. And I reference this, sir, because I want persons to understand the magnitude of the challenge that we have. Here's a situation where the tourism industry is the lifeblood of the economy. Here's a situation where now the airlift has been significantly impacted because we have moved from a position where we would have had in the past on a yearly basis 2.5 million seats coming in, which is around 50,000 seats a week, if the mathematics is correct. And we have a situation now where you're looking at about 2,000 seats a week coming in. Let me make the point as well, sir, that those 2,000 seats are not all coming at the same time. We are seeing those seats come over a period of time. Where in the past, sir, you would have had, at this time of the year, British Airways operating with at least 7 flights, could be as many as 9 flights a week, but at least 7 flights. You now have 1 flight coming a week. Where in the past Air Canada would have been operating daily, you now have 2 flights coming a week. And let me say to the chamber, sir, that there was a situation where the flight, I believe, for tomorrow on Air Canada, I believe it's this Thursday, that the flight was cancelled. The flight was cancelled because there was not enough business going north. And I reference that to say that while we have been able to talk about this airlift, and while it is agreed that this is the airlift that will be coming back, the reality is that that can change. And therefore, I think that the government must be complemented in the manner in which it is sought to go about and to seek to ensure that we have persons coming into Barbados, being able to stay in Barbados, being able to work in Barbados, and being able to contribute to the economy, because that is vitally important. I have a friend, sir, that him and we were having a discussion about assisting some people. And he said to me, Rudy, you must have cash to care. So you're going to have cash to care. And the reality is that I'm sure many of us, if not all of us in this chamber, during this period would have assisted persons that need assistance, vulnerable families, vulnerable individuals. But the reality is that you do need some cash to care. And if we are therefore going to ensure that we are able to save the most vulnerable, and that we are able to keep the economy going, and that we are able to secure Barbados' future, we have to get some economic activity going. That is critical, sir, and that is very important. I believe, Mr. President, that Barbados has all of the right attributes for working remotely. Some of them, though, we may need to improve on. We have political stability. We have a good healthcare system. The telecommunications, generally speaking, is good, but at times there are some challenges, and the providers may need to look to enhance that. Because I do have to say that while we can talk about this program, we have to make sure that the expectations that people have, that those expectations are met when they come here. So we cannot have a situation where persons are encouraged to come here and to work remotely, and then there are challenges with telecommunications or with utilities or anything of the like. So I think it is very, very important that we enhance in those areas where we have to enhance. But the overall experience, I believe, sir, will be very positive and will be very good. We have attributes related, of course, to the culinary experience, and attributes, of course, related to the sun, sea, and sand, which is still very, very important. So, Mr. President, I support very, very strongly this Barbados work stamp. I think that it is extremely important. Sir, from the time this was first mentioned by the Prime Minister, there has been significant talk about it throughout the globe. It has been on in newspapers. People within the United Kingdom have communicated with me and told me that it has been in the UK newspapers and sent clippings. It's been on television, some of the bigger networks. It has been on social media. And I'm told, sir, that there would have been about, I think it was about 4,900 already communications that would have been through the BTMI with respect to this work program. and the interest that people have in the program. I should inform the Chamber, sir, that many BHTA members, their representatives in the source markets, are saying that there is a lot of interest with respect to this remote program, and that the Barbados Work Stamp is something that they are interested in knowing a bit more about. And therefore, it is the desire that once this bill passes through today, and I'm very hopeful and optimistic that that will happen, that we can then start in working with the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. to fashion the appropriate marketing to start to entice persons to come here and to work remotely. So the development of an appropriate marketing campaign is appropriate and very relevant in relation to that. Sir, you know, I've heard some comments made in relation to the definition of terms. And I'm not going to spend very long talking about that, but I'm going to relate a couple things that occurred with me, or that I've been exposed to. So when I was a youngster, in my teens, I felt then that persons different to me should not function and should not exist. That's how I felt. I was then young and giddy-headed, I guess. But now that I'm at this age, in my young old age, I look at things a little different. Don't let me call for the Bible now. Don't let me reference a page. Let me go straight, sir. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But now I've become a man, I put away childish things. I believe that I have it right. Those more versed in the Bible can tell me if I'm correct or not. The point that I'm making, sir, is that I think you have to become more tolerant and look at things from a different perspective in a more mature and responsible manner. Mr. President, in 2015-16, when I was the Chief Executive Officer of the Grenada Tourism Authority, I participated in a promotion in the United States. And I did what I thought was a very good presentation in relation to Grenada as a tourism destination and speaking to all of the attributes and all of that. And when I was finished, I asked if there were any questions. And one of the tour operators, a travel agent, got up and he asked, does Grenada welcome people from my community? And he said that I am a gay travel agent. Do they welcome people from our community? I waited for the minister to answer. I was standing, and the minister didn't answer. And the answer I gave to that travel agent, I could say here in relation to the same aspect with respect to this issue. We do not ask, sir, when persons book a trip, we don't ask your sexual orientation. When people book a trip, we don't ask you what is your education or anything like that. We open our arms and we welcome you, but we do require you to follow the laws of Barbados. And that's the point. And I think, sir, that what is happening, that there are some people who, are throwing up a little smoke screen. They want to divert from what is really a very good policy. In the heart, sir, they know that it's a good policy. In the heart, sir, they know that it's an innovative policy. In their heart, sir, they know that it's a policy that will help to take Barbados forward. But for their own political, personal, and I wouldn't use that word in the chamber. But for reasons known best to them, they can't come up, sir, and wholeheartedly support it. But the reality is that this measure before the chamber is one, sir, that is very significant and one that should be given full support by all of us. Mr. President, I am very happy to stand here in support of this bill. It demonstrates that the government of Barbados is thinking outside the box. It demonstrates that we have a prime minister who is thinking outside the box and is not simply just, well, talking words. You know, the country may have become somewhat accustomed in the past to a prime minister that never said anything or never acted or functioned or took the lead. We are fortunate, Mr. President, that we have a prime minister, and sometimes I wonder, where does she get the energy? I really wonder. Sometimes, sir, I may send a message, and you know, the discussions that you have, the prime minister is always thinking, always on the ball, always looking to find ways in which she could improve the lot of Barbadians and to ensure that our lives are not in any way, that our lives are not in any way complicated. I think, sir, that has to be commended. And I've said that organizations tend to take on the character of the leader. And the truth is that in this country, we have a leader in the Prime Minister that is very focused, very determined, very committed, very hardworking, and prepared to take all of the actions necessary to deal with the environment that we are in, but also to ensure that there's a better Barbados and that there is a Barbados for future generations. There was a time, sir, when there was talk about Barbados being a failed state, even in these very challenging times, that did not exist then. When there was talk about the possibility of Barbados being a failed state, you don't hear people saying that now. You don't hear people saying it because there is confidence in the leadership. And when I say the leadership at this time, I'm not only speaking, sir, to the Prime Minister, because I think that the Minister of Health has done a fantastic job. I think it's a team effort. Everyone is doing a fantastic job. But I think what is also very critical and important is that the person who is leading is making sure that she is marshalling all of the troops and that no one is sleeping on the job. Mr. President, sir, I give this bill my full support. I'm obliged to you.
Senator Boyce?
Thank you, Mr. President. Normally, Senator Grant follows my usually short contribution, so coming after him, it's a unique opportunity to be able to give my side, and I must thank him for a very robust presentation. It was somewhat enthralling as he led us through the skilled practice of swaying those who are observing such an eloquent speaker, Mr. President. My philosophy, sir, of course, is that it's better to debate a question without settling it than to settle a question without debating it. So perhaps, as I rise from this independent spectrum, we ought to examine both sides of the argument and see where we land in terms of this proposed legislation, Mr. President. What I did notice, though, was that there was a lot of reference to the concept of tourism and that this fell within the ambit. But Mr. President, we will be aware that tourism itself is defined by traveling for pleasure. And the purpose of this stated legislation is to facilitate non-nationals who work remotely from Barbados for a period of 12 months. And I think, sir, that while not moving away or in any means taken away from the contribution made by other members of this Honourable House, perhaps will aid in the interpretation of the purpose of the legislation, sir. For my part, in arguing the side of the positive or the proposition, sir, I believe it is innovative. I believe, Mr. President, that it shows a thinking government trying to find a solution to an existing problem. How do we encourage persons to the country to bring what we hope are the attendant benefits? Mr. President, it has moved quite quickly from inception or conception, sir, to here we are dealing with implementation. And it's interesting, but that will be a topic for another debate, how it has worked its way from a concept into what it may soon become in terms of reality. Mr. President, the global coverage has been very, very impressive, and I think it only stands to benefit our island the more that persons hear about it and are interested in taking part in its offering. And it can be described as action. Something is being done, and in these circumstances, sir, we believe that you need to take these positive steps to seek to find solutions in these times. It was very comforting to hear that what is provided can be revoked, and it gives us some comfort that should there be persons who seek to utilize this opportunity for nefarious means, that we will have some element of control. And I'll speak to that shortly, Mr. President. A matter of fact, sir, I so value what we have here that I have the audacity to stand here before my fellow members and say we should charge more. Market prices should not be a factor in determining the product that we in Barbados have. And I think we need to be cognizant of what we have to offer persons who seek to have 12 months in this beautiful isle of ours, Mr. President. Sir, support has been enthusiastic from the players in the sector, those involved in the real estate and the hospitality industry, as well as the attendant service providers. Maybe, sir, this would encourage skill sharing by persons who come to the jurisdiction with some unique skill set, and as hinted by Senator Dr. Springer, perhaps there'll be resulting IT infrastructural development and support to accommodate these persons. So certainly there are many bases on which this legislation can be praised. But in seeking to come to the balance, sir, we also need to look at the arguments for the opposition, and not opposition, of course, in the political party sense, Mr. President, but in the debating term, Mr. President. And that is that for all the good intentions, there are several factors which would cause one to pause, which I believe, Mr. President, we would all benefit from articulating and encouraging debate. You see, Mr. President, this concept that you ought not to criticize, while it has its place in a very limited sphere, does not necessarily resound to the best result. I think we have all benefited when we have had persons who have offered constructive criticism. And maybe it's how that criticism is presented, Mr. President, that results in whether it's or whether it is refused. Someone once told me, sir, it's the bedside manner of the doctor, not necessarily the skill of the practitioner, which results in the patient's acceptance. But sir, in terms of the potential negatives, the first one that came to mind is, of course, the potential abuse by those seeking to skirt our work permit regulations. A concept which could be utilized is if I have a company in Barbados by the name of ABC, ABC BVI Inc. can be incorporated like that, sir. And ABC BVI Inc. can have someone who says, I'm going to Barbados to work for the 12-month period, while still providing services to ABC in Barbados. These are the type of the legal shenanigans, sir, that we would hope the government will have the resources and the vigilance to prevent the abuse. Sir, there are those who are concerned about the COVID risk and the fears as expressed by Senator Dr. Rogers, sir. And of course, the simple reality is, sir, that this is an attractive option as long as we remain relatively COVID-free. If we drop our guard, we will suddenly find that those who are clamoring to enter suddenly grow silent. Another factor to consider, Mr. President, is the true cost of having such a worker. In other words, there is the cost which, and I would defer to those who utilize the proper terms, Senator Nurse and Senator Drakes, the concept of an already burdened infrastructure which we have in the island, and the utilization by that infrastructure of persons who are not paying taxes, while there is an element of consumption tax that they are contributing to, is that consumption tax and the very, I will say, low fee enough to make up for the utilization costs in terms of the infrastructure, roads, et cetera, that already, and healthcare, we are seeing suffering from need of taxpayers' dollars, which of course is reduced in these times, Mr. President. And while we stand here in this chamber, and Mr. President, just a bit of a digress, you know, this concept of senators and what they do, it would be interesting, Mr. President, if you were to ever venture in social media, that despite what we may believe, we are classified as one by the public. There is no divide inside these halls. So when recent legislation was passed, I saw a young man say, I don't know what them senators in there doing. And I say that to say this, we need to be aware that when actions are being viewed by the public, there are some who don't take the time to distinguish the different actors. But on that point, I raise that to say, Mr. President, the fact is that we recognize, while we have evolved as a society and as individuals, and what might be an individual position as opposed to a government position, there are persons in the society who the concept of what is a partner has a more traditional bearing. And those persons, as Barbadians, have a right to have their voices heard, and whether or not they are happy or discontent, an ear should be given while understanding that not necessarily we will be acting in the interests of an individual. We have to do actions that are in the best interest of the country and recognize our core beliefs, Mr. President. So while there's also the issue of those who may be concerned about what is socially acceptable and what may be impacted and what is Barbadian in 2020, that's another factor, and that's a factor which comes after in terms of the government's determination of how it will deal with the scenario. I say no more on that at this time, Mr. President. Sir, there are some who will argue that this is an example of trickle-down economics, where the aim is that by these persons who come in, that there will be some benefit to those lower down on the economic ladder for services they may need. But the immediate beneficiaries would be those who have the benefits of having properties and other amenities which will be consumed by these persons. So whether the benefit for the small man in this, and I assume that would be addressed in due course, Mr. President. And then, of course, as hinted by Senator Nurse, we have seen that there's a phrase, sir, Mr. President, and let me not, they say the devil works hard, but a certain reality star works harder. And we have a situation, Mr. President, where any tax incentive which is gained by individuals who are allowed to work outside of their jurisdiction for an entire year will be quickly neutered. And the question is, are we prepared for the attendant backlash or the attendant adjustments that we ourselves will have to prepare for when that comes home, Mr. President? So we must be mindful of what we reap by this which we sow. But sir, after we point out the positive and after we consider the negative, I believe this is legislation which we should support as the government is trying. I think someone described it, I can't remember the source, as it is a case of leadership where we are entering into a dark room and the leadership is trying to find its way slowly. And that's what we're doing. No one knows what the future holds in regular times, much less in the age of COVID-19, Mr. President. And at the end of the day, once we maintain the control as we have, and let me join in echoing the support of the government for how it's handled the COVID-19 pandemic, this is something which will hopefully redound to the benefit of Barbados and which has my support. But Mr. President, you know, when I saw this legislation, I got excited because I saw the title when it popped up in the email, as we all get them now, Mr. President. You see how we evolved, Mr. President? There was a time there was a motorcycle and paper wrapped up, Mr. President, by which your order paper was delivered. Now you get the ping and you observe the email as to what is coming at you. Yes, Mr. President. So when I saw this turn up in my inbox and I saw Remote Employment Act, I got excited. I say, well, all right, we're dealing with, you know, how we can structure employees who are working from home in Barbados, safe working environment, more law for lawyers to argue, you know, so, you know, but, so I'm hoping that that is coming, and I'm hoping to see guidelines issued or the relevant legislation issued to support employers and employees in these times. The fact is you have persons working at home. I can say that we have worked and advised in regard to drafting working from home policies, but the questions which would arise from these policies is, of course, liability, resources, and potential issues which relate to having to provide service. An example, Mr. President, is it that you are working from home, and I've raised this concept already, Mr. President. Picture that we are in an employment right tribunal hearing, and there is a dispute as to whether you or the person you're representing has been working adequately during this COVID period. And the defense that is mounted is it was a pandemic. I am trying to stay safe and take care of my family. I am sorry that Mr. Boyce wanted 12 reports done during this period. I could only do 2. What is a reasonable expectation of an employer and an employee during this time? What is the reasonable expectation for an employee who is working at home, and what is the reasonable expectation as to support or communication, Mr. President? So that is the type of legislation I thought we were going to debate, but I am pretty sure that it will be coming sooner rather than later, Mr. President. And this leads me to the other point, sir. Where are the standing order adjustments to allow us to make these contributions virtually? Why must we, and I have no problem attending, but I am very concerned about Snow's owner. Why must Senator Franklin be here if he does not wish to be here with us and he can make his contributions virtually? Other jurisdictions have done it. It will take a simple, let me not posit that. I believe, sir, it is something which the legislation can readily adapt. We have the resources, we have the technology, and we have not the ingenuity, sir, to bring it forward. How can we be debating remote working without discussing remote working with regard to the parliamentary services? Just a thought, Mr. President, and it's something which is within our ambit to do, sir. We have so many persons making their contribution in different spheres. They do not physically need to be in the building, Mr. President, I submit, to make those contributions. In conclusion, sir, but there's one more point. But in closing, sir, this is legislation I support. As always, once we monitor and once we see how we implement, we will succeed. But if it is subject to abuse and if we do not keep control of our COVID numbers, sir, it would be for naught. And finally, sir, I think that this is an appropriate time to say whether the Caribbean regionalists, now is the time when we see our neighbors to the north struggling, that we perhaps should be looking even harder at the regional economic integration, support, and reliance in this time as to whether we will be the tourists for each other, we will be the ones who provide the service, we will be the ones who provide the goods, and we will be the ones who provide the market. Is that not something that we should be looking at quickly at this time? Now we recognize, and I remember the initial discussions with regard to the concept of a CARICOM bubble, and it sounded very nice, but then we saw that certain jurisdictions took their own lead on that. But let's not lose hope, and let us continue to hold hands with our regional brothers and sisters and find a solution to this problem. Mr. President, I support this legislation. I hope my exercise of arguing both sides is understood, and let us move forward and get on with the people's business in a safe manner. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Boyd. Senator Tate, it is now your chance.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this afternoon it has been an interesting debate that we've had. This legislation is the result of what we have all been referring to as our new normal. It has derived from what we have all been exposed to in the sense of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the government has seen it fit to devise those, I would say, rescue pieces of legislation in an effort to address a lot of the issues that have arisen, in particular as it relates to our economy, our tourism, our people. The bill before us, sir, Senator McConney, when she rose, she spoke of there's fear. We need to be focused, flexible, and fast. And as much as I would have been one in the past to complain about legislation that comes to the Senate too quickly, in the instant case, especially with the perceived competition that has reared its head, the various heads, I understand the concept behind the bill. I understand the need to move quickly, fast. I believe I understand what the government is trying to achieve. But for me, sir, and I don't say but to say that I do not support the bill or I'm opposed to the bill. I have what I would say direct or indirect concerns that come with this bill. And so I propose this afternoon to raise my concerns, and by doing so, seek clarity with certain areas. And I am going to, unlike Senator Rogers, who used C in terms of his caution, I propose to continue with the F theme, not as a means of a failing grade, but I'm going to piggyback on Senator McCartney's use of F. My first concern is that as we debate this bill, we've had the czar, together with the cabinet, having to come to the country and issue a very stern final warning. My first F. Final warning. Why did we need a final warning, Mr. President? Because we have people in the country who have been flouting the protocols. You keeping up, y'all? Second F. But the flouting is not a joke, Mr. President, because we have to be right in order to be encouraging visitors in. Because the facts are that the statistics show that we have COVID by importation. So, we as a people, following the direction of the government, and in particular the leadership of the Minister of Health and Wellness, who I gonna clap for. He is to be commended. In his quest to encourage us not to retreat and not to surrender, he came forward, and the Prime Minister and other government officials, and said, this is how we are going to do it. This is who we are. We are going to wear masks, we're going to sanitize our hands, and we are going to social or physical distance ourselves from each other. So I'm going to see my friends, and I'm not going to hug. I'm going to bounce. I'm going to bow. I'm going to wave. We get to a point where we are at zero, and all of a sudden, everybody gone mad. There's something fundamentally flawed. 2 F's one time. Y'all are what number? 5. Thank you, Senator Boyce. With that. Fundamentally flawed with that, Mr. President. And I'm wearing this mask because I was directed by the Honourable Clerk of Parliament that I should speak with the mask on, and as much as it fretting me, I'm going to wear it. To make the point, we cannot wait till now to be ignoring the protocols that have been put in place by the powers that be. It is ridiculous. And I, for one, am furious. Because if I am following the protocols, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm trying to make sure that I live, and that the person next to me lives, because we don't know if we're asymptomatic unless we've gone for a test. We don't know. So we need to be our brother's keeper or sister's keeper. So I am confused or flummoxed at the concept of people waiting till we get to this point to flout the protocols. And of concern to me, Mr. President, is the fact that from what you're seeing on social media, some of the persons who are flouting these protocols are persons who should know better, who are in high-ranking positions, who are officials in high places. We no longer have a media where it is just a newspaper, so that if a picture doesn't look good, you can move that picture and put another. We have the type of media where we're getting real-time communication. So if you are caught doing something wrong, it's going to make social media, even if it doesn't make the newspaper. We have to lead by example. We cannot continue to have situations where persons in charge are seen in the public domain having close and personal conversations without a mask on, with people who have their mask at their chin or below. The exposure is present. I, for one, am concerned. We are opening our borders to persons. We're saying, come, work here. I get it. But not to our detriment. Every person who comes here under this bill will require interaction with potentially all of us in here, even if it's to be in the same supermarket. But what about the people in the tourism industry who will be cleaning for them, washing for them, interacting with them, shopping for them, babysitting for them? We need to follow the protocols. And it offends me that I could see on social media at a restaurant, hundreds of persons and not a mask in sight. That offends me. It offends me to see people at the opening of or the reopening of a restaurant, no mask in sight. Or the only persons that have on the mask are the servers. But if you are the person without the mask and you are the person with the disease, what are you doing? You're putting these people at risk. Then they go home and they put their family at risk. Then they come and see me as a client and put me at risk. We need to be setting proper examples for our people. We have a situation in this country where if certain people do it, it is so. If they see certain people doing certain things, it's the law. It doesn't matter what is written. So the persons in high places need to pay attention. They need to stick to the protocols that in some cases, some of them helped to draft. Mind you, I say to the Czar and the monitoring team, forward march. Whoever you have to shut down, shut down. That's how I feel. Because we are not introducing anything new, and I recognize that what I'm doing is so wrong. I'm touching up my mask. I acknowledge it. I will sanitize my hands when I'm finished. Forward march, go ahead. And I was again flummoxed. Are you using it again? No, not flummoxed. Let's use frazzled. To read that there is a voice in the private sector suggesting that you don't go to immediate shutdown, but you give people warning, and then another chance. And who's supposed to police that? And why are we giving people warnings for protocols that have been established from day one? What the Czar spoke about was nothing new. Social distance, wear your mask, and sanitize. So why you need a warning to do what we have been doing from day one? Why you need a warning to do what allowed us to go to zero? No. We have to be a more responsible people. And we have to be a more responsible country. And we have to move from talk to action and enforcement if necessary. Because this is no joke. There are facts that have been reported. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The fact is that it has been reported that we have a second strain of COVID that is worse than the one that we have been exposed to. Mr. President, I have heard about the Harrison Point facility. I have heard certain eminent medical professionals refer to it as the Harrison Point Hotel. Mr. President, that is one hotel I do not wish to get to know. I don't want to go there. I don't want to experience it. I really don't. Notwithstanding the high-level care you will get, the high-level staff you are going to be exposed to, I would rather not ever experience Harrison Point. Therefore, it behoves us to make sure that while we deal with lives and livelihood, that we make sure that we are paying proper attention to our lives. And those persons who are irresponsible, are reckless, and frankly full of foolishness need to be fixed. Oh, wait, I take that back. Need to be flogged. Thank you, Senator Holder. Not physically, though. While we are dealing with those persons who are breaching the protocol, sir, I have just a few other things that I'm seeking clarity about. And in particular, it has to do with the whole issue of quarantine. We have the 72-hour PCR test that persons are being called upon to have when they get here. And when they get here and it's negative, I've asked, and I'm not sure if I've had an answer, so I don't know if I will get the answer today or it's something that will be looked at. But what happens to the persons who are bringing the PCR that is negative, then they go into the community? Are they to be tested again? And if they're to be tested again, how do you get them back? And if they're to be tested again, what do they do while they wait to be tested? Are they under lock and key at a facility? And if so, how is that managed? How is that policed? If they don't have the test and they have to be tested here, what happens to them while they're waiting to be tested? Where do they go? How are they managed? Are they into the public? Are we exposed to them if they happen to come and go shopping at the same grocery that we shop at to buy their supplies while they're here for their 7 or 10 days? To me, that's a little fuzzy. And I would like to understand that as it relates to the quarantine and the exposure to all of us and those persons who will be working directly with them, be it cleaning, transportation, babysitting, whatever the case may be. So in that regard, I would like a little more clarity. And I think I'm not alone there when I say that that is a question that has been on the lips of a number of persons in terms of that gray or fuzzy area as it relates to quarantine. Mr. President, in terms of the persons who will be coming here, I believe that the bill addresses that which needs to be addressed. It was fast, it's effective, so be it. I, for one, hope that, as the minister constantly says, the situation as it relates to COVID is dynamic, it's fluid, and I understand that. I do hope, however, that while and in the process of focusing on the livelihoods of persons, that there will be a refocused position on how we are to deal with these breaches of the protocols so that we can take it back to where it was and to the level that it was. It cannot be right that we are going places and we're hearing stories of people not using hand sanitizers anymore. We're hearing stories of people not doing this temperature. We're hearing stories of people not wearing the mask. And then you're getting cursed because you don't want to deal with somebody who is not wearing a mask. We still have people in stores who, if you want to use your debit or credit card, want to take it from you. They want to touch up this and touch up that. No, Mr. President, we need to get back on track as it relates to the protocols. If not, we can be opening ourselves to a terrible situation by virtue of allowing people in. Barbados is a paradise regardless. For some people, it may be a haven. But we want it to be a haven in a positive way, not people running from where they are to come here to spread anything other than joy. I pray that the monitoring team, the czar, the ministry, the government will be able to fix things and refocus and get back on track so that we can move forward. With those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Senator McConnell.
Mr. President, thank you for allowing me to close this debate. And I'd wish to start by saying thank you to all of the honorable members of this House who have given their contributions. And I'm happy to see that we have a full House of persons who are in support, albeit some people have expressed their concerns. And certainly those concerns are to be treated in a manner that's due. As is normal, there are some concerns that I will certainly seek to respond and provide some clarification to. In particular, there was a matter raised earlier by Senator Franklin about the people coming in and bringing in all kinds of communicable diseases. I believe that Senator Grant addressed that partially in making the point that we normally welcome tourists to Barbados, all kinds of tourists, but we don't ask them to declare every single disease that they have, and that this is a tourism. This is a tourism initiative, and that we are not at this time going to be asking them to do that. However, I would want to draw attention to the part of the bill that indicates that persons who are coming in under this would need to provide proof that they have valid health insurance so that they do not become a burden on the system here, whether they get sick here or they are sick and need to be attended to. So do know that we have thought about this and we have made sure that we do not violate people's privacy in ways that would not be necessary at this time, and that we have put things in place to ensure that they do not become a burden on the taxpayers should they become ill at this time. Another point that was raised was with regards to doing checks and making sure that all and sundry and perhaps those who are of the unsavory character, paraphrasing, would not be allowed to enter this country, etc. I do want to, again, reassure the members of this chamber and others who may be listening that Barbados is indeed being responsible in terms of vetting those persons who are applicants. The GRCC, which is the Joint Regional Communication Center, which has responsibility for looking after regional security. The Barbados government will be working in collaboration with GRCC in terms of vetting. And of course, you have to know that when persons send the advance information, which you would see included on the application forms, as part of the vetting, the information is scrubbed against both internal and international security systems such as Interpol and others. So just reassuring that indeed we are considering those risks and mitigating to the best of our ability. And I want to add at this point, I did mention in my presentation that even if we approve someone and we later discover something, the minister has the right to revoke. And so therefore there is no entitlement to this. It has to be approved. They must go through a vetting process. And should there be something that comes up after the vetting process, that can be revoked. And so I just want to give that assurance. Also, there were some comments made by three persons, I believe, three members, honorable members of the House with regards to price and whether we're competitive or not. The simple answer to that is Barbados has chosen to be a trendsetter. We have chosen not to follow the market. Therefore, when you are at the head of the market, you don't really and truly, you are going out there setting the trends and you are setting your prices and other things to suit whatever we consider to be acceptable. What is happening is when you're entering something innovative, you are among the first in the world to do it, you're going to have to implement, and then you learn and you change and you adapt just like any other business opportunity that's out there in the world. And so I would want us as Barbadians not to be afraid to be innovators, because innovators mean that is new. You never did it before. You may do some things wrong, and our whole attitude has to change, Mr. President, from that of success or failure to that of success and learning. And that is how we are going to have to adjust in a world where we have to innovate and we have to change, we have to make transitions at speed. I also heard this call from many, and I want to just answer it generally with regards to who comes in and who does not. And I just want to share that Barbados does business with the world. And we have welcomed the world to Barbados through tourism and business and other means for several years, and we've done so successfully. We are signatory as a country to human rights agreements that stand on the principle of non-discrimination and on equality in terms of how we apply the rights and freedoms to which everyone in this world are entitled as human beings. And Barbados, having signed on to those agreements and believing strongly in that principle of non-discrimination, we will continue in that vein, as we have heard the Prime Minister say, to respect the international agreements while taking the time at the appropriate time, as the Prime Minister outlined, to look at the local situation as it relates to those other matters. I also want to speak and say thank you to Senator Greenidge for making the point in his presentation that this remote employment bill presents no threat, no harm, no foul to Barbadians. And there is therefore no need for Barbadians to be concerned that there is any intention or reckless attempt, as some in this chamber would have us believe, to be able to do harm to Barbadians. I think you have heard many honorable senators, Mr. President, speak about the outstanding job that Barbados has done under the leadership of Minister Bossigan, the Minister of Health, and the Czar, Mr. Richard Carter, and others of the team in terms of helping Barbados get to where it is. I believe it is Senator Rogers that said that discipline has got us here. And I am sure that you know that if you know this government is not about to give up ground that it has worked so hard as a team to be able to build in terms of Barbados' recovery and being able to manage this pandemic and flatten the curve. So this country has witnessed us be responsible in the way that we have responded. We are not now about to just become irresponsible at this point, and to let you know that the protocols are in place. If we go to the GIS site, you will be able, that's the Government Information Service site, all of the protocols are there. And the orders are there as well. And one of the things that Barbados will recognize is that over the period of this pandemic, we have adjusted as we've needed. We have come up with new orders. We have increased the protocols, reduced them. We have made changes. And we have done that in consultation with all of the relevant stakeholders in so doing. And so I want to reassure this country that we will not fall back from that position at this point in time. We will continue to make sure that the health of this country is balanced by the economic interests that we also need to serve. Senator Nurse spoke. I'm really grateful to Senator Nurse for the points that he made, including commending the Prime Minister and her leadership. Senator Springer spoke about the opportunities for Barbadians that will redound, certainly from us having the kind of expertise here from digital nomads and others that will take up this opportunity. And Senator Cummins made a really important point. She made it clear that this is a tourism initiative and not necessarily an immigration initiative, and that we have to be able to separate that in our mind. If not, we will get ourselves confused in some of the arguments and in some of the fear that is being stirred up by those who might wish to distract us from what this really is. Senator Grant made an outstanding presentation, and he spoke about the balancing health and economics and about securing the future. One of the things he mentioned, which I also want to speak to, is about our need to strengthen our telecommunications even as we seek to welcome this. And I just want to take the opportunity to share that the Cabinet of Barbados has approved that quality of service standards be implemented in the area of telecommunications, not only in terms of technical standards, but equally in terms of customer service, customer service. And we are currently in the process of working with those in the telecommunications industry as well as the Fair Trading Commission to ensure that telecommunications treated as a utility will continue to be subject to regulations that we are developing, and we are also getting the support of the International Telecommunications Union in working with us on that. So letting you know, we are working on it. We are in the process of developing those standards that will help all of us to get a better quality of service, not just from a technical side, but equally from a customer service side. Senator Boyce spoke about monitoring and ensuring that those who come in do not run amok. And I want to say that there is a register of those persons who receive this 12-month stamp that will be kept by the Ministry by the Immigration Department, and indeed through the double taxation agreements and other agreements that Barbados has with other countries around the world, in the event that there is a legal basis on which there is need for exchange of information, that information is being kept and being treated with respect for the privacy of others, but equally with responsibility for our obligations under treaties relating to exchange of information. So understand that we are not seeking to be any place for people to come hide away from the taxes. Equally, you will know that many countries were concerned about eroding their tax base. This does not erode anybody's tax base. In fact, people will continue to pay taxes in the respective countries. Mr. President, I believe that I have Senator Tate, who covered at the end. She spoke about her concerns that would have prompted the Tsar and others to give what she called a final warning. And I hope that in hearing this, you understand that this government of Barbados means business when it comes to looking after the safety and the livelihood and the lives, as you called it, of this country, of the people in this country. And indeed, I want to say that with regards to people flouted, the monitoring unit is doing its work, and people have the opportunity to report to the monitoring unit as well, should they see something. If you see something, say something. And that is about us all being our brother's keeper, as Senator Tate also pointed out. Mr. President, these are the bigger points that have been raised, and I hope that I have responded adequately to as many of them as possible. It is true, as Senator Rogers said, that discipline got us here, but you know what will take us the distance? Not only caution, but we have to balance that with daring, because we will not get out of this situation by being so afraid to do things that we end up doing nothing that is meaningful. We actually are going to have to look for courage, and we are going to have to tap into some daring at the same time that we are balancing caution, if indeed we are supposed to move forward. We have the opportunity with this remote work bill to embrace the world in the economic reinvigoration of this country. We believe, Mr. President, in the dignity of people, of all peoples, and as we go forward in the implementation of this bill, it is with respect for all people entering these shores, whether it's for tourism, for business, or other purposes as we move forward. Now, we know remote working, sir, as I would have said at the beginning of my presentation earlier as I introduced the bill, that we have the studies, we have the research that shows that people are happier, they're more productive, and they're able to do more and save money in many cases for businesses and others as they work remotely. So whether we look at the business case, whether we look at the remote working perspective, whether we look at the tourism perspective, whatever perspective we look at for this bill, we see that indeed it is taking us in the right direction. And it is with these few words, Mr. President, that I beg to move that this bill again be read a second time.
The question is that this bill under consideration be now read a second time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methink the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair, and the Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration of the bill, this bill in detail. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now in committee.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clauses 1 to 5.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 5 stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 to 5 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 6 to 9.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 6 to 9 stand part.
The question is that clauses 6 to 9 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
Question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Let me see the
Passing it, say.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Remote Employment Act 2020.
Question is that the bill under consideration do now pass and be cited as the Remote Employment Act 2020. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. And so the bill has been passed and will be cited as indicated, the Remote Employment Act 2020.
Mr. President, that concludes the government's business for today. I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn. Sign it aye. Oh.
Question?
Mr. President, 1 second, please.
Next Wednesday. Next week, Wednesday.
What's next week date? Next week?
Mr. President,
What's the date?
I beg to move that the Senate do now
29th.
adjourn until next week, Wednesday, the 29th of July.
The question is that the Senate be now adjourned until next week, Wednesday, the 29th. 29th of July at 11:30 a.m. I must correct myself, until 11 o'clock. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. And we now stand adjourned until next week, Wednesday, the 29th, 11 a.m.